I'm Stephan Lewandowsky. I'm a professor of cognitive science at the University of Bristol, and I study how people process misinformation. Well, I think most scientists are paid by the public when they work for a university, and we do our work ultimately on behalf of the public. And I think from that follows that we have a responsibility to the public to communicate our research findings. Well, in my experience, most scientists are trained to communicate to the scientific community using some very esoteric journals and conferences and a very complicated language. However, equally, I've experienced a lot of scientists who are quite willing to break out of that and to communicate their science in everyday language to the public, and usually find that extremely rewarding. And that's certainly what's happened to me, that I started communicating to the public and writing about science for the public about 10 years ago, and it is one of the most enjoyable things I do. Okay, if you look at the data in many, many countries, you find that the public continues to trust scientists a great deal, more so than many other professional groupings, for example, lawyers. And there's a good reason for that, and that is that science is organized skepticism. Scientists are skeptical by nature because we tend to challenge each other's findings, and we tend to rebut things that we don't agree with in the scientific literature. And over time, that process has served us well, and I think the public understands that. Now, there are, of course, situations when scientists get it wrong. But even when they get it wrong, they're accountable by the scientific process to acknowledge that. And even when somebody is wrong, you can still learn a great deal from why it was that they were wrong. Sometimes failures can be very informative. And in contrast to that, we have people who believe in conspiracies and who think that climate scientists are just making up this hoax called climate change. Well, that kind of opinion is not productive, and even if you prove it to be wrong, you can't really learn anything from it because it was nonsense to begin with. There's been a lot of talk about this so-called reproducibility crisis recently, and to me that is a prime example of the scientific effort being self-correcting. Now, a lot of people think of this as a crisis. I think of it as, yeah, maybe a crisis, but also a wonderful case study in how science is correcting itself. Because it wasn't the public, it wasn't conspiracy theorists who created this concern over that crisis. It was scientists who felt, hang on, we have a problem, we have to fix it. Now, my observation over the last 5 years has been that we're in the middle of a revolutionary transformation of how we do science. And I think the changes we've seen over the last 5 years are just phenomenal. Data availability, openness, transparency, pre-registration of analysis plans, and so on and so on. All of those things are becoming standard practice that 5 years ago were only known to very few people. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, what's the alternative? I mean, we're not gonna stop doing science just because some things don't replicate. What's the alternative? Become a conspiracy theorist? That's not. Well, the public is, of course, in a difficult position at the moment because there's a blizzard of information out there, and you can find a variety of opinions on Facebook or on the internet that range from the absurd to the, incredibly sophisticated. So how can people handle that? Well, I think it's difficult at the moment because we haven't developed the skills yet as a society to discern valid information from invalid information. However, based on my own research and that of colleagues, I'm actually quite confident that we can train people to become more discerning in their information. We show this over and over again in our experiments that people become less susceptible to misinformation if we can teach them how to detect it in the first place. And one of the things about misinformation is that it differs from true information. And the signature is sometimes extremely obvious. So, for example, people who deny climate change are invariably incoherent. And an incoherent argument, a contradictory argument, can never be right. We know that. That's just a logical impossibility. And so detecting incoherence is a very easy way, if the public can learn to do that, to dismiss information that has to be false. Okay, there's been a lot of concern about the post-truth world and the sort of seeming disappearance of facts from public life. And I think there is some truth to that. And I am certainly very concerned about the level of discourse in some societies, in particular the UK and the US at the moment. However, if you look at what people actually think and how people actually behave, then there are also encouraging signs, because for example, in the United Kingdom, people's trust in scientists has increased dramatically over the last 20 years. It hasn't decreased, it has increased. So scientists actually now have a greater role to play in communicating with the public than in the past, because they're trusted more. And that tells me that the public is actually quite clever in figuring out which systems are on average producing the truth. And they're recognizing that science is a truth-seeking mechanism in the long run. And likewise, I think the public is actually crying out for valuable information. And if we can just provide an environment where valuable information can be detected more easily, and where misinformation can be dismissed more easily, then I think we can recover from this crisis without having to resort to terrible things like censorship or the Ministry of Truth. Well, I think it's not just media, it's social media. It's dealing with a lot of things. And of course, that's only half the story, right? Because there's a gorilla in the room, or a big elephant, or some huge big creature, and that is the politics of this, right? And of course, if you look at where the misinformation comes from and how it is pumped out, then very often it's an organized political movement. Climate denial isn't just a random occurrence. It is something that was carefully planned and has been staged for the last 20, 30 years, ultimately by the fossil fuel industry. And we know that because, you know, I mean, we do the research and look at their tax returns and we know what they say, and we have internal documents. So there is an organized effort to confuse the public on that. And of course, there are certain newspapers that are pursuing an agenda, and they will, whenever that is the case, they will cast aside truth and accuracy, and they will present the public with misinformation. So training the public is insufficient. We also have a political context, and if you really want to solve the problem, then you have to address the politics underlying post-truth.